Good Earth rotation, fellow sentient beings. This is how to braid hair. Starting off, there are a few things that you would need to know before braiding, and those are, most importantly, the hair types. Starting off, we have the straight hair, and this hair is kind of like spaghetti. It's very straight, and it can go anywhere from being thin to thick, but either way it's straight, so it has many things in common. Now, some care tips in general for this kind of hair, this very straight hair, is that it can get very oily because the hair from the follicles down is kind of like a slide where the oil just slides down. So we'll definitely want to wash it regularly, use dry shampoo if we can't wash it. And like the oil is not always a bad thing, it can be shiny and stuff. But most of all for braiding, we want to brush it before braiding because unlike other types of hair, it can look really just messy if it's not totally straight when it's being brushed for braiding. So the best kinds of brushes for hair in general are always the ones for thick hair, because the ones that are for thin hair and all that aren't really as smooth of a brush, so you always want hair brushes for thick hair. And also for the type 1 straight hair, tight braids are always best, because if you braid them loosely like you can other types of hair, they'll just fall apart because they're so straight and shiny. Next, for the type of hair, we have type 2. This one is it can go either from wavy to the beginning of curls, so it's got more texture to it, and it's not like spaghetti anymore, it's more like a flowy hair. Now, to care for this one can actually skip some washes because the hair isn't so much like a slide where the oil will just slide down. But also for this one, it can get a bit drier, which is why it's not so oily anymore. It's kind of neutral. So you'll definitely want to use conditioner on it to keep everything nice and smooth and brushable and not tangly. But it does not always need brushing, because a messy braid can besides looking like really nice, it can stick together really well because of the natural texture of the hair. And we also don't always need to brush this one, because running your fingers through it just to get some of the tangles out and get it in a manageable form is oftentimes good enough for just a simple thing like braiding. Now, the reason why this one can have either tight or messy braids is because the hair is still untextured enough that you can kind of pull it a bit to be a really tight braid, but also it has enough texture to be messy, so it's really nice and versatile like that. Now here we have type 3. Type 3 is just straight curls. All texture there, it's like a very curly pasta. Now for this one, it's kind of like type 2, except that it's sometimes more often a bit on the drier side. And other than that, it's again pretty much like the last type, where you don't always need to brush it. Fingers are enough to detangle it many times before brushing. Although for this one, a wide tooth comb might be useful, because it'll make it so that it's kind of like you have more fingers basically, so it's easier to detangle. And also for this one, the messy braids might be kind of your only option, because getting this hair to straighten out might not be possible with just your hands because it's so naturally curly, unless you do something like straightening it or whatever. But if you're just braiding, that's probably not necessary because messy braids are quite pretty. And here we have type 4, which is the coils. Kind of like you wrap something around a pencil for a long time, and then when you take it off, it's in this coil, or kind of like the metal thing on the end of a binder, just like really springy. Except unlike the metal on the binder, this one is actually really delicate and breakable. You never want to brush this kind of hair because if you do, it just might snap. This is also the driest kind of hair where you always need to, after washing it, condition it, or use a leave-in conditioner like coconut oil. And before styling and during styling, you always want to use like a hair oil, or again the leave-in conditioner like coconut oil, argan oil, sometimes even just a little bit of something with olive oil in it. There's like a lot of different natural oils, but of course with oils and stuff, you always want to ask the person before you use them in styling whether or not they have an allergy or something, because many of the brands out there for hair oils can have things like almond oil in them, which some people are allergic to, so you always want to be careful of that. So to detangle this one, definitely it'll be no brushes, but just use your fingers, and also a rat tail comb is nice because it's got like this little pointy end where you can just section the hair with it and split any kind of like knots and get the detailing out and stuff, but that's pretty difficult to do, so using your fingers might just be the best course of action. And also hair picks are really nice. Those are what are most commonly used for this kind of hair. But as for braiding, I'm not even actually sure this hair can be braided on its own with the kind of braids that I know, which are the 3-strand braid and the fishtail braid. So you might want to research that yourself. Or another way is that if someone has their hair straightened beforehand, you can do just any kind of braid on it then, and it'll work out fine. But it's always important to know whether or not they have the type 4 hair because of how dry, fragile, and in need of moisture it is. So you always either want to ask or know the person well enough to know that their hair is naturally this type. Now, for all types, we're going to want to check for damage before starting to braid or starting to do anything usually, because people can get damaged hair from dye, heat, excessive tangling. So that can make it really hard, if not impossible, to style. And some of the signs for this is that the hair is crunchy to the touch, it breaks easily, like with just a little tug, a piece of it just falls off. And of course, like a lot of tangles in the hair, or dull hair where it's like absolutely no shine. It's like it's made out of like sand or plastic or something. Now, if you're working with damaged hair, you'll definitely need the leave-in conditioners like the coconut oils and that kind of stuff, or the hair oil, because this hair is basically like twice as bad for being like breakable as type 4 hair is. So you'll really want to check that out before doing anything. Now, before we're braiding, usually we're going to want to acquire the items. And these things are nice to have around, like hair ties to keep the hair tied at the end when we're finished braiding, the hair brushes, the hair picks, this kind of stuff. But as for like the conditioners, the hair oils and all that, like unless you have like a lot of advanced warning before you braid someone's hair, you might not always have this kind of stuff available. So maybe either like plan ahead or just like it's totally fine to just go in and braid someone's hair, just like even without like brushes or anything like that, and just do it for fun, because it doesn't have to be perfect every time after all. So definitely be mindful of that, and I will say it again, everything does not have to be perfect all the time, and like braiding is a fun thing. But you'll always want to have a hair tie, because unless you have a hair tie, the hair is totally going to fall off, like fall apart when you're done braiding. So that's never quite a nice thing. So you always want to have a hair tie, or just like a loose rubber band or piece of string or something. Now let's get into the actual braiding section. And first we're going to start off with the 3-strand braid. And this demonstration I did with some rags that I tied together at one end, and my hands are nice and clean there, as you can see, as they should always be before braiding, and they're lightly moisturized so they're not difficult to move or anything. And here I'm starting off by pretending to smooth out the hair, and now I'm sectioning it a bit into 3 different parts. Now I move 1/3 of it to one side and 2/3 of it to the other. Then I separate 1/3 from the section with 2/3 and move it to the other side. And then I keep going like that, as you can see, the 1/3 out of the 2/3, and just going back and forth while holding each side as I do it, and smoothing them down on either side so that they don't get tangled as I'm doing the braiding. And it's just that side to side motion with the moving of the hair and holding on to it that gets the braiding done. And of course I'm always going bottom to top, from the bottom section to the top section. And now I'm leaving to go get a little thing to tie it with, because I forgot that, which you should never do. So now I'm back, and I'm redoing the little bit that I did, because that's what happens when you leave unbraided hair. And then I just tie it on using both hands, because I'm not even sure it's possible to tie hair with just one hand. And as you can see, it looks kind of like a piece of bread or something. Now for the next braid. This is the fishtail braid, and this one may be even easier than the 3-strand braid because it has less steps to it. But they're both equally easy and are probably the easiest ones out there to try. This one, I tied a lot more rags together because there's technically more pieces involved, but there's also less pieces involved. Now I'm just smoothing the hair down and pretending to run my fingers through it again to get the little tangles out. And now I'm sectioning it into 2 separate pieces. And then I take one piece from one of the 2 sides and I move it over to the other side. Just like so. And then I do it again, moving the one piece from one of the sides over to the other side. And then I just keep repeating that all the way down. One from one side to the other side, and then one from the other side over to the one side. And of course I'm always hanging on to either side to make sure that I don't lose it or it goes anywhere. And I'm also smoothing my hands down it to make sure that it doesn't tangle as I'm braiding it. Now it doesn't really matter how much hair you take for either side of the fishtail braid, just so long as, you know, it's an amount. Although they should be slightly evenly sided in size, but if it's not, it's okay. You can always correct it as you go. And now I'm tying it at the end, as we always do. Now for this one, I'm showing you how you can make it a little bit tighter, and a little technique that I use to make it so that once it's tied at the end, that tie is not going to slip off or anything. It's where I just put the tie and make a little lump, and then I push the lump through on the other side. And again, it looks kind of like a piece of bread. But so why I didn't actually demonstrate with hair this time is that, for one thing, I kind of only have the hair on my own head, which won't do you much good for trying to do it on someone else's head. And also, I only have one hair type available, and most people tend to be somewhere between around type 2 or so with the amount of thickness and like a bit of the waviness. So I can't really demonstrate any of that stuff effectively. But also, learning to braid on something that's not hair, like rags or string or rope or just about anything, you can even do it with bread dough. It'll make it so that you practice like the motions of it and just getting it in that braid shape, which is really all you need to know how to do before braiding hair, or at least these most simple braids. And that is all, folks. The most important thing for braiding hair is definitely practice. So the more you practice it, and it might take a long time for you to get the hang of it, you might want to repeat the videos and take a good long look at them. But generally, practice is all that's going to make you great at braiding. It may take days, weeks, sometimes even like a month or so, but I guarantee anyone can get the hang of it. So that's all, folks.